Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our JW3 Friday briefing. At one point, I'm going to count how many we've done, but these have been ongoing since October the 13th. In case there's anyone new on the call, I'm Judy Trotter, Head of Adult Education, and it's been another tough week in Israel. So here we are again to connect with each other and with Israel. And our special guest this morning, who's Dyonna Ginsburg. I didn't check on your pronunciation, Dyonna. I hope that's right. So Dyonna is the COO at OLAM, which I must admit I hadn't taken in a lot until I contacted Dyonna. And since then, it seems to be popping up all over the place, including at JW3. So it's a network of Jewish individuals and organizations who are committed to global service, international development, and humanitarian aid, which, of course, those of you who were on the webinar on Sunday heard a lot more about. She previously served as Director of Education and Service Learning at the Jewish Agency and was the recipient of the Schusterman Fellowship and World Council of Jewish Communal Services Exemplar Award. That's a very long title. For outstanding leadership in strengthening the Jewish people. The Schusterman is an organization we've worked with in the past and is very, very impressive. She currently sits on the advisory boards of Yanshoof and the Global Jewry initiative. Dyonna has a BA in International Relations from Columbia University and an MA in Jewish Education from Hebrew University, which we're also well connected with. So, as always, please put your questions in the chat and I will pose them if there is time. We would like there to be time. There may be. So, Dyonna, welcome. As I said at the beginning, it's been a really tough week again. So thank you so much for joining us. And for what is not an easy task, please share with us what you would like to from this week and what we've had this week. Thank you so much. Dyonna, over to you.
Thank you so much, Judy, and thank you to all of you for being here. It's really a pleasure to be here with you this morning. I am calling in from my home in Jerusalem. And what I'm hoping to share with you over the time we have together is a little bit about how the war has impacted the work of Israeli and Jewish humanitarians around the world. I think in certain ways, this is representative of how it's impacted Israeli society writ large. But in other ways, there have been unique and far-reaching impacts on this particular slice of Israeli society. And so first, I'll just share a little bit about myself and about OLAM, and then I will talk about the way that October 7th and the subsequent war has really impacted our work and the work of many of our trusted partners. So a little bit about myself. I am originally from New York. I was born and raised there. My mother is Israeli, originally from a kibbutz. My father is a congregational rabbi. And I made Aliyah back in 2002 at the height of the Second Intifada, immediately after I'd completed my undergraduate studies. I originally worked in the field of Jewish education. I have a master's in Jewish education, but for the last 15 years or so, I have worked in the field of social action, volunteering, social justice work. First, domestically within Israel, I headed up what was arguably the first organization in Israel to call itself a Jewish social justice organization. And then more recently, over the last 9 years or so, through my work at OLAM, I have been involved globally. I've gotten to know the UK Jewish community fairly well at OLAM, as you'll hear shortly. Several of our partners are headquartered in the UK. I actually have a colleague of ours on our team who is based in London. And one of our core funders, founding funders, the Pears Foundation, is London-based. And I have also spent time at JW3. I've attended various in-person and virtual events over the years. And our UK staff person has actually hosted events in JW3. So it's really great to be here with you today. So a little bit in terms of OLAM's work. As Judy mentioned beforehand, OLAM is a network of Jewish and Israeli individuals and organizations that work in the fields of humanitarian aid, global volunteering, and international development, largely in developing countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Our partners and members work in a variety of fields, so ranging from disaster relief to global health to agriculture to education and beyond. And what OLAM does is serve as a convener and a field builder for our partners and members. Currently, we have over 80 partner organizations. So those are all self-identifying Jewish and or Israeli organizations that work in these fields. In the UK, that includes World Jewish Relief. It also includes the international development work of World Ort, Highest J Corps, the Step Up, and several others who are part of OLAM's network. And our partners collectively have over 4,000 staff members and are working in upwards of 80 different countries around the world, serving the needs of the world's most vulnerable. And OLAM really has two functions. On the one hand, it is bringing together those who are doing the work, promoting best practices, learning, collaboration across our network, and simultaneously working with leaders in the Jewish community to engage them with the importance of this work as an expression of our deeply held Jewish values. And so in terms of our Jewish leadership work, we actually have a very close relationship with the Office of the Chief Rabbi. Chief Rabbi Mervis has traveled with us to Ethiopia and to India. And more recently, just 3 weeks ago, he came to New York and spoke at our annual gathering where we had 200 people from our practitioner network from 18 countries, around the world. And so that's a little bit about OLAM and the general context. And what I want to share with you is the impact of October 7th on our work. And what you'll hopefully hear is that it's been deeply personal, far-reaching, ever-evolving, and ongoing. And so deeply personal. Tragically, we've had many losses within OLAM's network. In fact, I have had the opportunity to share this story many times over the last 8 months or so. But the way that I first learned of the scale of what was happening on October 7th was when I first turned on my phone after Havdalah. I am Sabbath observant, and although there are many observant Jews in Israel who did turn on their phones on the day of Simchat Torah on October 7th, we did not. We live in Jerusalem, so we had a sense that something was going on. There were about 7 or 8 sirens during the morning. That is very unusual. In my upwards of 20 years in the country, we had never experienced anything like that. And we had stopped people on the street who had said that, I'm translating the Hebrew, but they had said that there was suspicion of hostage taking and of terrorist infiltration. And although I did not speak about it with my spouse or my parents who were with us on that day at the time, I think in my mind, I had assumed the worst possible scenario. 30 terrorists had entered, maybe 5 people had been taken hostage. That was the scope of what I had envisioned that entire Simchat Torah day. And it was only after Havdalah that evening that I turned on my phone, and I hadn't even had the chance to look at the news reports. And I saw that a WhatsApp group that I'm on, which, as you may know, is the preferred form of communication in Israel for Israelis. There's a latent WhatsApp group that I'm on. About 14 years ago, I participated in a leadership program with 9 other Israeli women activists in San Francisco. And we really gelled as a group and have had periodic reunions over the last 14 years. And this is a group that, about once a year becomes active when somebody remembers that we miss each other and we want to get together for coffee. And I saw about 200 messages. And those messages included messages from Vivian Silver, Aleha Hashalom, who was the co-founder of an OLAM partner organization called Ajik Nitzbed that works primarily with the Bedouin in southern Israel and Israeli Arab populations throughout the country, but also has a project in Cameroon, hence they're part of OLAM's network. And Vivian had messaged the group. She had actually, we found out later on, messaged several groups that she was on, telling us that there were terrorists at her door. And she had mentioned, she had messaged the group, and then there were all these messages from the 9 other women in this group asking her if she was okay, and radio silence. And then there was also a message from another woman, not connected to OLAM, but yes, connected to me, who is from Kfar Aza, who was not there at the time, but her entire family lives there, and she was sending us messages in real time. And then there was another woman in our group who nephew was a soldier who was already killed on that day, and she had already found out on October 7th. And so that, before I even looked at the headlines, was my first sobering realization that this was deeply personal, and the scale was way beyond anything that I had expected. And so Vivian Silver was both a personal connection, but also part of OLAM's network. In addition, one of our CEOs of our 80+ partner organizations was taken hostage herself. She is the founder and president of an organization that works with farmers primarily in Ethiopia and Rwanda. And she was taken hostage with 6 family members, including her grandchildren, who are 3 and 8 years old. Thankfully, she and 5 of her family members were released in the hostage deal. I've had the opportunity to now meet those grandkids, but her son-in-law is still there, and she lost 3 family members on October 7th. She only found that out when she came back. And so within, I would say, the first 24 hours, 48 hours, it was clear that this was deeply personal. And those are just 2 examples of the most sort of obvious losses, but many of our partners, including Israeli academic institutions that run programs for students from developing countries, as well as many of our global volunteering projects, lost alumni on October 7th at the Nova Party or subsequently in the Army. So this has been a deeply personal crisis for us. 50 of OLAM's 81 partner organizations are headquartered in Israel, and half of OLAM's 6-person team is based here as well. Now, because I mentioned before, the reason why these organizations are part of OLAM is because of the work that they do overseas. And so many of our partner organizations, even those headquartered in Israel, had never worked locally in Israel before. In the 9 years since OLAM was founded, OLAM has never responded to a crisis in Israel because that was outside of our mission. And it was clear that there would be other umbrella organizations that would fill that need. But because of the scale and the unprecedented nature and the deeply personal quality, it was clear that our partners and OLAM would step up at this time. So 16 of our partners did respond and are still responding to the needs of Israelis who were most impacted on October 7th. So survivors, evacuees from the south and the north, and populations that were already marginalized, such as asylum seekers, African asylum seekers, and or Bedouin communities who, for a variety of reasons, were not necessarily accessing other services. I would also say that several in our network leveraged their knowledge to support the more than 100 people from developing countries who were killed, seriously injured, or taken hostage on October 7th. For one reason or another, that's not necessarily a story that has been covered significantly in the headlines, but there were 100 such people. And currently, in terms of those who are still in captivity in Gaza, there are people from Tanzania, from Nepal, and from some other countries. And because our partners have worked in those countries, There are people in our network who speak those languages. They were really able to serve as intermediaries and support for their families, some of whom are in rural villages with no access or support, people living in extreme poverty, and really, very distant from what's happening here, who have been able to support in that way. I'll just share a little bit more, and then I'd love to open up for questions and answers. But I think part of what has been really inspiring for me to see and has kept me going is the way in which our partners were able to respond to these needs while simultaneously experiencing their own personal trauma, and at the same time as responding to other crises around the world. This was far from the only crisis that has impacted our network this year. So the partners that have responded to the needs of those who were most impacted by October 7th are also still working on the ongoing war in Ukraine, earthquakes that happen in Turkey and Morocco, the drought in Ethiopia, mass displacement in Sudan, climate-related weather crises, etc. And one such story I mentioned before are the CEO of one of our partner organizations who was taken hostage. We actually recently produced a short video profiling 6 people within our network in terms of the impact of the war on their work. And we interviewed her number 2, who is a longstanding colleague of hers. And they had just launched a new project in Rwanda right before the war broke out. And within sort of the first month, they were simultaneously serving as the emergency sort of room, trying to leverage all connections around the world to figure out a way to bring her home, even though there actually was no sign of life. And we did not yet know that she was alive until the night that she was released. Doing that, and at the same time launching this new project in Rwanda. And on this video, he says that what motivated them was the knowledge that she would have wanted them to continue with their work, because without them, these farmers who don't have access to funding otherwise, wouldn't be able to feed their families. And he says, if she would know that we stopped our activities because we were just working to save her, there would be hell to pay. And he has shared that because he has such a deep relationship with her, he was among the first to visit her when she was released, and she was in Barzilai Hospital in Israel. And he said within 5 minutes of seeing her for the very first time, she said, "Did you continue with the project in Rwanda?" And so these are the kinds of people that I have the privilege of working with. I will also just say that in addition to our partner organizations, OLAM works with individual Jews who work in the sectors of international development and humanitarian aid outside of a Jewish or Israeli context. So people in large UN agencies or large international NGOs. As you can imagine, this has been a really tough time for them. Many have experienced a sense of isolation, strained relationships with colleagues, very complicated feelings in terms of statements that have come out of their organizations that seem to have anti-Israel or anti-Semitic bias. And so OLAM has also been stepping up to support those people at this time. And here too, it's been inspiring to see how some of them have been really trying to create a culture shift within their own organizations, which, as you can imagine, is a really tall order, but they've been trying really hard. And I'll just say, in terms of the ongoing impacts on our network, what we've seen is that many of our partner organizations have lost funding, whether from Jewish funders who have shifted to Israel or anti-Semitism, which we're the first to say that is very important. But we've been trying to figure out a way to convey to Jewish audiences that alongside increased support for Israel and Jewish communities around the world, what does it look like to support Israelis and Jews who are doing exceptional work and are sort of the beautiful face of our people around the world? And they've also been losing funding from non-Jewish donors who, label it outright anti-Semitism. I think my understanding of it is people who just want to avoid conflict and so have distanced themselves from Jewish or Israeli organizations. And so they've been between a rock and a hard place. One of our partners recently said that since October 7th, he's lost 50% of their income, which has directly impacted the communities he serves in India. And the last thing I'll just say is, why is this story, I think, important? One, I think we should be really proud of Jews and Israelis who, despite all of the trauma that we've experienced, are simultaneously doing great things at home and doing their best to continue wonderful work abroad. I think if that work were to stop, we'd be giving a Hamas a victory that they don't deserve. So what does it look like for us as the Jewish community to support them in keeping that work alive while we're supporting our own needs? And I also think that, pre-October 7th, perhaps there's been a critique of some of our partners of saying, the poor of your city come first. How come they're serving vulnerable non-Jewish populations around the world? But it was very clear when there are needs at home, our partner organization stepped up immediately without hesitation, and that it is not a zero-sum game in that regard. And the last thing I would say is, as an Israeli and as a Jew, I think there are moments over the last 8 months where it feels like the whole world is against us. But one of the things that we've really seen is that, particularly in some of these developing countries, in terms of longstanding partnerships, people who are disconnected or removed from what's happening in Israel and don't really understand, there's been an outpouring of solidarity and love. And I'll just give one example, and this is not someone who's far away, it's someone who's close to home. But right after I saw those WhatsApp messages on that Saturday night of October 7th, the very first person to call me was a young Eritrean who's an asylum seeker here in Israel who came as a minor. He's now in his early 20s, but he left Eritrea at the age of 9 and walked to Israel, and he has a relationship with our family. And he called to find out that we were okay. And I would say I was embarrassed that I didn't think to call him. And so at moments when we think that like we're all alone, there are people whose lives are intertwined and care deeply about us.
Wow, thank you so much. That was so full. I mean, first of all, let me say that was a masterclass in how to do a presentation. You covered so much in such a very short time, precise, and whether you do it all the time or not doesn't mean that it's easy to do, and you covered perfectly. So yes, I was just going to a question, but actually it was just thank you and best wishes for your work. So there's so much I want to ask you, and others will join in as well, but finding the personal strength to cope with all this, because you're dealing with it on a personal level, you're dealing with it on a professional level, and what you said at the end about the way the whole world sometimes seems against, and yet there are all these pockets of hope and support. It's a lot to deal with. So we've talked many of these Friday mornings about trauma and the traumatization that people are going through. Are you having to deal with that as well? Sorry, I was trying to make a question out of all that while saying it all, but how do you deal with the trauma?
Great question. I would say those first 2-3 weeks were the most intense that I've ever experienced personally and work-wise. When they say working around the clock, I was literally working around the clock. That was not sustainable. Thank God I have 2 little kids who were out also home at the time. And after about the first 5-6 days, my 7-year-old said to me, I don't want babysitters or Saba and Sata or grandparents to watch me anymore. I need you. and that, I think that was a wake-up call for me, that the work that I was doing was super important, but there are also little kids who need their mommy. But that time period was super intense. And I think there, in general, we saw this in civil society in Israel. It was almost this it was this tremendous outpouring. In my case, it was through work, but for many people, it was volunteerism. And I think it was this frenetic energy that came out of a sense of helplessness, but wanting to do something. And I also have never witnessed the type of sort of camaraderie and volunteer spirit. In terms of like over the long term, I would say we put a lot of focus at OLAM on training our own network in terms of individual resilience and organizational resilience. I think that's always been important, but it's just been clear to us. And one of the things that we did at OLAM that I feel really proud of is, since we're an umbrella organization, we're able to identify the needs of our partners. So we raised some funds from our own board members to provide micro grants for our partner organizations to support the emotional, mental, and physical well-being of their own staff. Because what we were seeing early on is you'd have a 10-person organization that works on, Israelis who work on global health in Ghana, and they were down to a person and a half because people were on reserves, people, had spouses on reserves, and it just wasn't sustainable. And so we really, pretty much wrote blank checks to our organizations and said, do what you need to do. So whether it's childcare bonuses or food packages or a spa day, whatever you think your teams need. And we did that for our own team as well. I think for me, what sustained me is feeling like the work is meaningful and that we're supporting people who are actually doing the work on the ground. But I think we've realized that in Israel and Jewish communities around the world, particularly for those who are, there's a notion of secondary trauma, who are engaging with this work straight on, that there's a tremendous amount of importance in, supporting the mental health and well-being of the people doing this work.
Yes, I think there's a feeling that it's never going to be enough. I know they've built centers for the soldiers, but it's really difficult. So one of the since asked Oliver to hear a little bit more about successful conversations colleagues have had about anti-Israel bias in a sector that's been so focused on the humanitarian situation.
Yeah,
hard one.
I think there are first and baby steps. It's been fascinating to me because there's been a surge of interest of Jews who work in the sector but outside of Jewish or Israeli organizations that have come to OLAM that I never encountered before, including people who are identified with the Jewish community and or have real ties in Israel. And several of them have been really working to like shift cultures within those organizations. It's hard work. I mean, I've heard from several people in large international NGOs say some version of the following. Our organization has, relationships with people all over the world. One person said, we have relationships with the Taliban. We do not have relationships with Israelis. That is deep. Now, since October 7th, there have actually been lots of meetings now for the very first time between CEOs of those non-Jewish, non-sectarian, large humanitarian NGOs and some of our partners, some of which we have facilitated, others that are happening simultaneously, independent of us. But those are baby steps. I think some of that bias runs really, really deep in some of those organizations. At this point in time, I think for OLAM, the jury is out what our role is in the larger sector. Our priority is to support our Jewish and Israeli organizations and Jewish individuals who work in this sector. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. There are baby steps that are happening, conversations that feel historic that never happened. But it's correcting something that like for a long time has just simmered, that has not gotten real attention.
But at least there's some hope there, which is
yes,
we don't always hear, which is good. So the conclusion of that question also from Oliver was whether that whether there's also been very difficult conversations with Israelis about, you know, the way that obviously not everybody's on the same line and with the way it's developed. It was the intensity of the beginning and where everyone pulled together because there was a horrendous situation to deal with. Has obviously changed over the months, and yet it is still very intense and it's still very hard. Have you been involved? Has OLAM, not you personally, been involved in those kind of conversations as well?
Let me make sure I understand. In terms of Israelis who are feeling isolation from the broader sector or having to respond, yes, we have definitely been involved. I think the Israelis in our network, of which there are many, are holding complexity in the ways that a lot of people in the world don't, because they are humanitarians who have had experiences around the world, including in Muslim countries, including, you know, and have relationships. And they are people who are proud Israelis or proud Zionists and have served in the army and are trying to navigate all of those things. I think they have been frustrated that that their voices haven't been heard and that there's no appreciation. There is not a lot of appreciation for the complexity that they hold and the unique perspectives they bring to the table.
Thank you. That brings us to 9:30. So thank you so much. As I said, it was a masterclass. You've added so much to our story, and I'm so grateful that you joined us and gave of yourself today. I wish you and everyone online a very safe and peaceful Shabbat Shalom. And we look forward to welcoming you back to JW3 when you're in the country again. So please let us know when you're coming in. Thank you, everyone, and take care. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.